welcome to our meeting. Welcome to our web conference of youth and commemoration. Today we are going to talk about commemoration, but we do not only with myself, we do also make use of the expertise of Mr. Remco Rijding. He's an expert on the Russian cemetery of Leusden, which is the starting point of a youth exchange we, wanted to be ended today, but instead we postponed it for a year. And this event serves as some kind of a teaser trailer, serves as some kind of a sign of solidarity, because we are all in this together. And we shouldn't forget that 75 years ago, some interesting things happened, some cruel things happened that still have their working on our world as it is today. And Mr. Rijding will talk about it. He has been the foremost researcher, journalist of the Russian cemetery at Leusden for around 20 years. And that gives him a lot more expertise than I have on any of the stuff, these matters at all. So I think he's the very best person to speak about it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jonathan. Welcome everybody from all kinds of former Soviet republics I can see, and other countries. I indeed do not have a lot of time, because this is one of the craziest weeks in the year with all the remembrance dates, and even though things have been different since Corona, still we had a lot of activities in the last weeks. But I'm not here to tell you about the last week, because you can read all about that on our website. I do think it's interesting to tell you something about what I've been doing for 20 years, and I hope my presentation will work. In 1948, the Soviet Field of Honor, the Soviet military cemetery, was opened in Leusden, in Amersfoort. Amersfoort is the city I live in. I was born in. Leusden is the village I grew up in. The cemetery is on the border of both. It was opened in 1948, and nowadays 865 war victims have been buried on this cemetery. I'm not going to tell you in detail about them, who they were. If you want to know more about that, you can check our website or read my book or ask me questions later on. But in general, they can be divided into three groups. The first 101 were prisoners of war who died in or around Kamp Amersfoort. Kamp Amersfoort was a concentration camp on the border of Leusden and Amersfoort, where almost 45,000 Dutch people were prisoners during the war, mostly civilians. However, 101 Uzbek prisoners were brought to this camp as a means of propaganda. The Germans tried to convince the Dutch that our allies in the east were actually Untermenschen, so lower kind of people. They selected people from Uzbekistan because of the way they looked. And they were treated really, really poorly in the camp. The camp was already a bad place to be for the Dutch, but for those Soviet prisoners of war, it was a terrible place to be. And as you can see, all 101 died in my hometown, Amersfoort. 24 of them died from hunger, illness, and bad treatment, and 77 were executed by the Germans on the 9th of April, 1942. So this is the reason why in my hometown there is a cemetery for Soviet war victims. Later on, more soldiers and war victims were brought here. The biggest group is a group of 691 prisoners of war who died from illness in different places in Germany. So they died in Germany, they were brought to the Netherlands after they died, buried in the Netherlands, and after the war they were brought to this new Soviet Field of Honor in Amersfoort. That opened, as you can see, again in 1948. So altogether with 73 others, among them Georgians and Armenians who were in German service. We just talked about it before this meeting started a little bit. They all were buried on this Field of Honor. And when when I came to this place more than 20 years ago, after being in Moscow with an exchange program as a student, I understood that this was a forgotten place. That's young me, 20 kilos ago, 20 years ago also. I came to this place and I understood that I had never heard of it. My friends had never heard of it. No one actually knew about this place. And I was shocked to learn that 865 war victims were buried in my hometown, and I had never heard of it. So I also understood that the soldiers were still not identified, and their relatives had not been traced yet. So the relatives were still waiting for news about their beloved ones. Their fathers, grandfathers, brothers, even husbands when I started. So I thought this shouldn't be this way. I need to change something about it. I was young and ambitious and maybe a little bit stupid because I never expected to be doing this for 20 years. But it appeared to be necessary. I started to identify soldiers and I started to search for their relatives. And this sounds very simple, but for 55 years, no one had ever succeeded in identifying even one soldier. Yes, for this group of 691, in most cases, their names are written on the stones, but I will tell you later that this doesn't mean anything. It's not enough to identify a soldier. So I started to search. I had no idea where to begin. And it took me more than 2 years to identify the first soldiers. And let me explain you a little bit how this works. It's very easy, very simple way of showing you what I do. In reality, it's much more difficult, but it shows you more or less the path of a soldier and also the path that I have to follow. So let's look at Vladimir Botchenko. He is from Crimea. I won't tell you which country that is because then at least one of you will argue with me. But he was living in Simferopol. Then the war started, and he was, of course, called to the army by the Wayenkomat, so the organization that enlisted soldiers. He was sent to the front. He was taken prisoner. He was brought to a prisoner camp in Hemer in Germany, Stalag 6A. And then in Hemer, he became ill and he was liberated by the Americans in April 45. And the Americans took him to a hospital. The hospital was situated in the city of Lüdenscheid. In Lüdenscheid, he died. He died from tuberculosis. And then the Americans decided that they didn't want to bury him on the territory of the enemy, not in Germany. So they brought him to the nearest battlefield outside of Germany, which was situated in Margraten, the Netherlands. So he was buried in Margraten, and only after a couple of years, the Americans decided they wanted to create a permanent American military cemetery in Margraten, and they were looking for new places for the soldiers with another nationality. So they were looking for a place for the Soviet soldiers, and they understood that in Leusden, Amersfoort, already 101 Soviet soldiers had been buried, and they brought those 691 to Leusden, and in 1948, therefore, the Soviet military cemetery was created. Now, I think this sounds very logical, right? This is the path of a soldier. But of course, I didn't know that. I knew only Leusden. I knew only this. I knew there is a gravestone in Leusden which says Sovietsky voin, Soviet soldier, Botchenko Vladimir. This is the first step. I knew only the last step of the soldier, which was my first step. And now I had to find out where did he come from. So after searching for a while, I understood that most soldiers were brought to Leusden from Margraten. So of course, I started to search for information about Margraten. And then after almost a year of searching, I found transfer lists. You can see on the top here, on the left, transfer list number 4. And the second soldier mentioned here is someone differently spelled, Batchenko Vladimir. Even the letter L is missing. And it shows that he was brought for Margraten to Amersfoort. Okay, so now I had the confirmation, indeed, this soldier is coming from Margraten to Leusden. Still, I knew nothing about him except for his last name and his first name. But I went further on, and finally I found the so-called reports of burial, the documents the Americans made when they buried a soldier. And I found the report of burial of Batchenko Vladimir, as it says. And here suddenly, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, it gives on the second line, it gives the place of death, Lüdenscheid in Germany. On the 25th of May 1945, Vladimir Batchenko died in Lüdenscheid. So of course, I started searching in Lüdenscheid. Here you can see it better, Lüdenscheid. And in Lüdenscheid, I found the so-called Sterbeurkunde, the certificate of death. And it gives the same name, now with an L, you see the letter L, Vladimir Batchenko. But it gives us more information. He didn't just die on the 25th of May, he died at 5 o'clock in the morning. And he died in Bouwklo, Reservelazeret 1. So that means the name of the hospital. And he was born on the 9th of June 1900 in Simferopol. And he was married with Alexandra, verheiratet mit Alexandra. So now I knew where I had to search. I had to search in Simferopol, and I had to search for a soldier that was born in 1900, and his name was probably Vladimir Batchenko. Of course, I started to search further, and I also found the so-called hospital cards. They came from a different archive in Germany. You can see on the top, on the left, Reservelazeret 1 Lüdenscheid Bouwklo. That's the name of the hospital. Here it gives the name of the wife again, and not just Simferopol as it's spelled here, but it gives the address Slobodka 7. Well, I can tell you Slobodka 7 is the exact address where the soldier was living in Simferopol. This is a street in Simferopol, and the house on this street, number 7, was built by our soldier himself. Of course, I didn't know that then, but that's what I learned later on. Then I started searching for him in Russian databases. For those who don't read Russian, here it says on the first line, Botenko, not Batenko, but Botenko Vladimir Vas. Vas, it means Vasilievich. So now I knew his father's name. Born in 1900, as we already knew, so it's confirmed. Missing in action, sent to the front from the Wayenkamat in Simferopol. And the name of his wife given again, Alexandra. And this time it's also with the father's name, it's Alexandra Gerasimovna. They were living in Yalta. Alexandra was living in Yalta. So we thought we had to look in Simferopol, but now suddenly it gives an address in Yalta, which is also on Crimea. So probably Alexandra moved after the war or during the war to Yalta. And now I knew I had to go to Yalta to search for the family there. Of course, there are hundreds of ways to get more information about his family. This, for example, is the certificate of marriage of Vladimir and Alexandra that I found. And so you can, if you know the name of the wife, you can search on her name and get documents maybe about did she have children, did she die, etc., etc. So this is the short story of what I do. I try to put steps back. I will show you again. I start with the cemetery. I find out where did they come from to the cemetery, then how did they end up on the cemetery, in which camp were they, and then when you have enough data, you can search for the soldier in Russian sources, and you can identify a soldier and know for sure it's not just Vladimir Batchenko. No, it's in fact Vladimir Vasilievich Batchenko, born in 1900 from Simferopol in Crimea. Okay, I hope this is all understandable so far. Yeah. Well, that sounds all very boring or scientific. I don't know, but of course, this is all necessary to do what is very important and what is very emotional, which is finding the family of the soldier and telling them that father is no longer missing in action. He is in fact buried in the Netherlands. And I went to Crimea myself. I searched for this family myself, and I found Dmitry Botyenka, the son of Vladimir Botyenka, who for 55 years had not heard a word about his father. And finally, I could tell him that his father was no longer missing in action. And as you can understand, this is very emotional news, very important for the family. They were in insecurity about his fate for so many years, and finally they could get closure. Dimitri showed me the family photo. So now the soldier with only a last name and a first name on the stone. So the soldier, which was only a stone, suddenly becomes a face. On the top left, we have the soldier, Vladimir Botyenko. On the right, we have his wife, Alexandra. And on this picture, we also see their oldest two children, Stepan and Piotr. Dimitri wasn't born yet, so he's not on this picture. Piotr was still alive when I met the family, so Piotr could tell me a lot about the fate of and the life of his father and the fate of his family after the war. Stepan, on the right, unfortunately, he was 18 years old in 1944. He had to go to the front as well, and Piotr told me how his mother responded when she received the news that Stepan, her oldest son, had died in Riga. So Alexandra, she lost her husband and she lost her son. After the war, he was reported officially as missing in action. They never heard anything anymore. Alexandra died, but luckily I managed to find Dimitri and Piotr, and I could tell them where their father was buried. For me, this was only the start. This was the first family I traced. We also organized a visit of the grave of Dimitri. He was the first relative ever to stand on the cemetery. This was in the year 2000, and this is when I decided that this is not just an assignment that I want to do. This is actually something that needs to continue until we have traced every family possible. So I continued. More than 200 families have been traced now. It became so big that I couldn't do this alone anymore. So we created a foundation in 2010. The goals are partially the same: identification of soldiers, searching for relatives, organizing visit of the grave. But we also understood that this place shouldn't be forgotten, and we need to do something to keep the memory alive. And therefore, we are also creating all kinds of projects to involve people and make sure the cemetery and the soldiers are not forgotten. Especially, we try to reach also young people. Well, let me show you what that means in practice. So I have some activities to show you that we've done in the last 2 years. We have organized a visit of the grave for several relatives. These are grandchildren and even great-grandchildren. You see that we have all kinds of different people visiting us. And we're also organizing ceremonies. So we participate in the May 9 ceremony that's formally organized by the Russian embassy with other embassies, but actually in cooperation with us. We cooperate with other authorities in other ceremonies, but we've also created our own ceremony on the 9th of April, the day of the execution of 77 Soviet soldiers behind Camp Amersfoort. We place candles early in the morning at 6:30 in the morning, because this was the time of execution. And also it's a time when, well, when you go from dark to light, and we like to bring light into the world, I would say. And we've asked a school to participate, so youngsters are taking part. Actually, this small guy in the center is my son. He's also a little bit involved in what I do. And this started out with 3 people, and now, as you can see, we have quite big ceremony. This on the left is the ambassador of Russia. Behind him is the ambassador of Belarus, and in front are the 2 mayors of Leusden and Amersfoort. So it started out with 3 people, and we've had more than 250 people early in the morning again, 6:30 in the morning. So I think we can say that those soldiers are no longer forgotten. We also participate in the May 4 event, that is the Silent March. This is on the day we remember our death in the Netherlands. And the Silent March also passes the Soviet Field of Honor, and as you can see, that means that about 1,500 Dutch people now every year pass those Soviet graves, and also they, of course, now will not forget about them. May 9th, ceremony on the Dien Победы, Victory Day for Russia and other countries, organized by embassies, but we participate. And on May 3, just before all those important days, we place flowers on all graves. So all 865 graves now receive flowers in advance of those remembrance days. These are actually the usual things we do every year. The special things we did in the last 2 years are pretty interesting. This is very special. We've, for the first time, identified unknown soldiers, so soldiers that are buried without a name. I found out who they are. I traced their families, and the families were ready to give DNA, and the authorities were ready to exhumate those soldiers and try to identify them. So this is what you can see here. It's the Dutch military participating in exhumation. Also pretty special, I think, is on Christmas Eve. On Christmas Eve, we place candles on all graves because relatives, of course, they live very far away, and Christmas is a special time also in the Netherlands. So it's very special to see all those 865 candles on Christmas Eve. Unfortunately, we've done this 3 times, and twice we had terrible weather, horrible rain and wind, but that doesn't mean that we will not continue doing this. We've also organized something that's never been done, I think, anywhere in the world. We've organized theatrical audio tours on the cemetery in the dark. So the cemetery was, of course, with special lighting and special aperture. It was able to walk there in the dark. You had a headphone with audio, with stories of soldiers and stories of searching for them. And together with students who were acting, and all kinds of reflections, as you can see here. So video, audio, theater, all together in what we called the theatrical audio tours of light. 2 more things, very big projects, bigger than ever. We are going to replace all gravestones. So 20 years of research has led to so many new data that we're now going to replace all those stones with the full names of the soldiers and dates. And the second thing we're planning to do is to create a visitor center. We would like to have a visitor center where we can tell all those stories. Some of those stories I've just told, but much more than that. And of course, that's a huge project because it means that we need to have a building and full-time presentation. So these are really huge projects. Well, Somehow I managed to do this within half an hour, even though I could talk about it for hours. That leaves us some time for questions, luckily. If you want to know more about what I do, what we do, you can visit our website or send me an email. And well, of course, I can give you also information about soldiers from your own country, if you're from the Soviet Union, former Soviet Union, I mean, of course. So I hope I've given you a short introduction to what I do, to what our foundation does. Again, all those projects I can talk about for hours, but I think this gives you an overview of all activities, and I hope this will also motivate you to stay in touch with us and maybe visit us next year when Corona is hopefully out of the world and everyone can come to us again. So thank you for listening. If you have any questions, please go ahead.
Yeah, I would propose, thank you a lot, Mr. Reiding, for your story. It was very interesting. If you have a question, I propose you write it in the chat box. And then if you wish to pose the question yourself, then I'm more than willing to unmute you. But let's keep it orderly. Are there any questions? Mr. Oh, yeah, Mr. Alexei.
Okay, this is Alexei from Russia. Mr. Reiding and everyone, thanks for this conference. We expected more young people to participate. We're sorry that there are not very many young people today, but I know that behind some of the boxes there are several young people that are gathered together to listen to this very interesting story. I think well, what you're doing, Mr. Reiding, you know yourself, but we also can speak for that this is very, very hugely important in today's world when people are brainwashed by mass media and they're very easily made enemies of each other. And we in the YMCA International, we know how important it is to build bridges of friendship across borders. And that's why when we learned about this new project, and by the way, we started to talk about it 1 year ago in France when the CEO of YMCA Netherlands, Robert, he brought us together with this first glimpses of this idea. And later on, we learned about your work. There are very interesting materials online. So we are very thankful for your information. We are thankful for what you have been doing. And I think we will be happy to share this story among our young people. And I hope that next year we'll be able to bring them together and this work will be developed even more. So thanks and all the best to you personally, to your family, and to everyone that is helping you with this project.
Thank you very much. Hope to see you next year.
Do you have any further questions, remarks? Ah, Lizzie. Oh. Please speak.
Yeah, unmute myself. I was talking. Muted. Yeah. So, yeah, I would first of all I would like to thank Remco for this very interesting overview. And I know I'm sure you can speak for hours. And we connected a bit earlier than some of you joined, and we discussed some of the background connected directly to Georgia. So it we also, and most of you received the link I shared with you. This is a tremendous work which is done on a historical level or scale, but also the emotional level. And you mentioned that it means a lot for those people, for those relatives, yes, to go deeper in those stories and let's say make peace with their past. So I think it's very relevant. Apart from establishing the history and tracing the story of one particular person, it means a lot for many other people linked to that particular person. So I think it's a very relevant project. So I hopefully will be able to get more direct touch with it next year. Hopefully all these problems will be behind. And the question to itself, it's a foundation, you mentioned it. Yeah, so it should receive funding. So what are the main sources? Are the governments of the involved countries also helping you, or the embassies? How is it organized?
Yeah, that's a very good question. You should divide regular activities and projects. We were growing. Before we started the big projects, the only way we were funded was by people, so by donations. And
private donations.
Yeah, we've created a program which we call Grave Adoption. You can adopt a soldier, and we're asking 50 euros a year, and we're using that money to put candles and flowers on the graves, to send a newsletter, to search in archives, to trace relatives, and to organize the visit of the grave. And not just organizing it, we're also usually paying for at least part of the visit of relatives. But if you talk about projects like renovation of the cemetery, we are not the owner of the cemetery, but we managed to talk and to talk and to talk, and then finally we got some people moving, and we managed to get funding for the total renovation of the cemetery. Funding that we have right now is 300,000 euros from the government of the Russian Federation. We have received money from the Dutch government, and we are receiving money from the government of Uzbekistan. However, the money doesn't go to us because we're not renovating. In this case, I'm just a middleman, the guy who pushes. So we're not receiving this money. We're only receiving part of the money from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which is meant for creating the information center. This is our project. We are dividing the usual money that we receive and this project, because we feel these are different things. We don't want to, we want to be very transparent in that. But the visitor center is a huge project. We have a budget of 50,000 euros for the whole year for everything what we do. But the visitor center is going to be 1.7 million euros. So I never thought that this would be real, that it would be possible, but we believe in it, and we think it's important and necessary, especially for youngsters, to, as was just said by Alexei, it's very important to build bridges, and that's actually what we are doing. Of course, I'm doing this mainly for the relatives of the soldiers, but I see that it's more important than that. That's just individual success, and for them that's the world, but for the world that's not the world. We need to build bridges to understand each other better, and that's what I'm doing. So
thank you for that. Absolutely, and thank you for the detailed answer.
Hey, I think I can have only one last question because I really need to go.
All right, Vadan?
Yes, I'm on. Thank you, Mr. Redding or Renko, for this great work you are doing actually, and also for the presentation. I missed the beginning of the webinar because I was not planning to miss it, but there was a ring on the door, and then I had to open it, and then it took time. So I have one question concerning you mentioned about the Armenian and Georgian soldiers who were on the other side of the war, and are they also buried in the same cemetery, or they are separate?
Yeah, this is also a subject I can talk about for hours. There are Armenians and Georgian soldiers among the prisoners of war, but there are also Armenians who were not prisoners of war. They were in German service. Of course, under terrible circumstances in the camps, they got this opportunity. Those who are buried on the cemetery here are mostly those who sabotaged the Germans or tried to escape from them, or they were usually executed by the Germans. So yes, they are a different group. Yes, they are sometimes You can discuss whether they should be buried here, yes or no. But anyway, they are usually the ones that did something against the Germans. So, for example, we have 7 Armenians who were executed by the Germans because they were trying to escape. Yeah.
But they all are in the same cemetery.
Yeah.
Okay. This was. I'm sorry. Maybe you spoke about it. I didn't hear it. And then from there, I just want to just use your very brief time you have now just to thank you really what you are doing and to commit on behalf of YMCA Europe that, you know, may God help us to overcome this coronavirus lockdown. We will definitely meet in person, and we will make a good tradition of hosting YMCA Europe roots camps there or events there. You know, I think it's a very, very symbolic place to bring young people and to talk about our perspective memories, as we call the project. Thank you very much.
All the best to you. Bye bye. I have to go.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Bye.
Thank you very much.
All right. We now will start with the second part of our presentation. This will be themed around a separate, more formal part, because today we are here to listen to the story of Mr. Riding, but we are as well going to talk about the topic of commemoration. And to help with that, I have posted some, I and Mila too, by the way, we have created some discussion questions, and I hope we can contribute to it in some way or another. I really hope to hear or to see messages written of the young people in our audience as well. And apart from that, I wish to share with you that I did initially intend to put the logos of all your respective YMCAs and organizations, but I didn't have the space for it. So I decided to leave it to the Netherlands and Y Europe, which covers as an umbrella most of your respective YMCAs. First of all, I wish to make use of a certain, I want to make use of a certain tag within Zoom, which is annotation. And we're going to test that firstly. And we do that by annotate on top of this screen on the presentation you currently see in front of you. So basically you have the option, a few options, annotate. There you can find a field where you can type a text message, and you can put that text message on the screen itself. And if you do that, we can all see it. And I would like you all to test it by answering the question, what does commemoration mean to you? I would like to ask you to mention in one word what commemoration does mean to you. Respect, future, keeping the story alive. So we have some other contributions. All right. Respect, future. Is there someone of you who has problems with finding the annotation function? If so, you can leave me a message and I can help you with it. But I think we can make up for this self-identification. Very good one. I think we can take from this that commemoration is a very, very, very diverse thing, of course. We can do it in many different ways. But the most important thing we can take from this is that it includes more than one person. As in, I can move this one. As in, respect is not a thing you do for yourself. Respect is a thing you do with other persons. As is dialogue. self-identification always happens in connection to a larger group. The same counts for the stories of many individuals. It's a thing we do all together. And that's, of course, the aim of the event we're trying to create for the next year. Together, coming to new conclusions, together, think about commemoration with the people of the younger generation, and together thinking really about these topics like memory, like commemoration, etc. Oh. Let's see. Let's see. Oh yeah. I then have a second question, and that is to to type in 3 words how you would consider the culture of commemoration in your country. So how in your country do people commemorate? Is there a certain logic? And the words I leave to you, so it may be whatever you wish. You can use once again the text function, the annotation function, but if you like, you can also do it in the chat box. What does commemoration in your country, what does it look like? Is it large ceremony, or is it more smaller scale? Is it something you do with your neighbors, or is it something you do with your schools? You can think of all different directions. Perhaps you have a special song related to it. Perhaps there is a parade. I'm talking about commemoration in a normal sense. Of course, the commemoration of the last weeks have been a bit distorted because of the virus, but in the normal circumstances. What does commemoration, the culture of commemoration, look like? Remembrance.
Are we doing it in chat box, or we can do it also here? It's better in chat box.
You can do both.
Okay,
It's optional.
good.
Focus on individuals. I see politics, show off, flowers. Remembrance. Family gatherings, legacy and traditions that we respect. Ooh. I was wondering whether the person who wrote down legacy and traditions that we respect would like to elaborate on that. If you want to do so, please do.
It's me. Jonathan,
right.
I wrote it.
All right.
Yeah, I think, I focus on the commemoration of the specific issue, yeah, which is the Second World War, and, you know, our soldiers there, and so on so later, because we have different occasions of such commemoration. You know, at least we have April 24 is a special commemoration day of Armenian genocide, but concerning the Second World War and everything which happened around it, I think we as a small nation really lost a lot during that war. You know, 300,000 Armenian men were killed during that war. It's more than American soldiers. So, and that's our legacy. That's part of our history. And it's wherever it is, how whoever wants to read that history in a way, which is politically okay for them now, but two of the brothers of my grandfather were killed during that war, and I still remember the tears of my grandmother and people who lost their children. So it's our legacy. We grow up with that tragedy, human tragedy, in our educational, in our formation, in our emotions and everything. And we build up big traditions, starting from the Soviet Union, respecting the people who fight that war, or also commemorating those who perished during that war. And I think that traditions, they are good traditions, because when you look at the things from the perspective of peace, not from the perspective of war, then that they are good. I don't think ever in the Soviet Union now people when do this commemoration, they build any hatred based on that. They do it just because it needs to be done, but they don't do it against anybody.
Yeah.
So that's the most important thing, and I think it should be respected. This is very important, that when you commemorate your victims, you don't commemorate it against anybody. You just commemorate them because they need to be commemorated.
That's very well said. That's very well said. It's definitely true that the victimization of society is something that is to some extent unavoidable. And on the other hand, we should also acknowledge that in some circumstances, as Mr. Reiding also said, war doesn't really know winners, doesn't really know losers. Thus, in many cases, it's about the suffering of many different people who reach a certain point in many different ways. All right. Who said family gatherings to hear stories? All right.
I mean,
No
I
one?
didn't write it, but it's kind of also tradition of my family. So we used to go, I mean, not this year, unfortunately, but we used to get together and we visit cemetery with my grandfather. And yeah, so we were getting together, remember him and remember different stories. And what it is a tradition of my family, for example.
All right. Great. Great. We can see this way that there are many different ways of commemorating. And the country we come from does in some way really decide the way in which we commemorate, in which we remember. And I think it's a very good thing to regularly exchange, to be aware of what people do in other parts of the world, or other parts of Europe in this case, because we all have our own stories and our own way of dealing with them. And it's important for this to intermingle. We are going to answer one more question and then we will close because it's already almost 2. The time flies. Yeah. What kinds of activities related to remembrance can we do with young people? This is some kind of a question we can pose for ourselves and in our respective lives, because most of us are all involved in some kind of youth work, and it is a good thing to involve other young people, because otherwise we run the risk of people thinking it's well, it's 75 years ago, why should it still matter? Youth Summit, interesting. Once again, you can leave an annotation, but you're also free to leave something in the chat box. A work can. Who wrote the Youth Summit? Alexei. Do you wish to elaborate on what you mean by Youth Summit?
Well, actually, Youth Summit is a very general name that can involve many things, but I think when we were still planning for the face-to-face meeting in the Netherlands during these days, I think in my view, this was a version of a Youth Summit. Youth Summit is in my opinion, is a working meeting where we're not only listening to some visitors, you know, who deliver speeches, but we're also working on certain themes and doing things together and dedicating everything that we do to a certain theme. And this could work very well to with the topic of remembrance.
Yeah. All ways to keep the conversation going. Who wrote Searching Stories? Searching Stories of. Who wrote that? Don't have to speak, but if you could elaborate, it would be nice. Otherwise, I would just go to the next one. Yasha. Do you wish to elaborate, Yasha?
Yes, please. Can
Go
I
ahead.
talk now?
Yes.
Yeah, now you can hear me. Great. I'm not sure why, but it's, you cannot see all of the words I wrote, I think. So I wrote Searching Stories of Individuals, and that was a typical thing my generation did. So maybe a bit like Mr. Riding said or explained before, we had like the stories of a soldier, of some person that died, and we were like asked to find out more about him or her, and so it kept the remembrance personal. Of course, we all had some persons in our families, but if I wrote earlier that remembrance is not only on that one day a year, because there are so many dates we have to remember. Like there are so many small places where something very bad happened. There's this one execution in Amersfoort, and then there's another execution and a battle somewhere. So there are many organizations organizing the remembrance of a specific date, so we can remember all year long, and this is done maybe a bit easier if you have some individual story dealing with the specific date.
Yeah. I do personally totally agree. It's an important thing to look at the larger picture, but also to focus on the smaller stories, on the lives of the individual, as well as large concepts like commemoration, remembrance, culture, large societies. There are different approaches.
Well, if I may briefly say, young people in general, in my context, speaking of Georgian context at the moment, they just have to know what it was all about. Because in our, the modern reality, this has become rather low-key because we have very few veterans left. There are the big parades or big celebrations happening, and young people have very vague understanding, some of them, of what actually happened and what importance this day means. We even have a debate when to celebrate for the last few years. Is it 9th or is it 8th? Okay, so we have this now even happening, this one. So, and I don't think this is the most important, but somebody wrote politics before that. So for me, it's taking the political connotation a bit. I don't think it really matters for those people that were part of this and they lost their lives or were affected. So I think young people and the future generations, they should just know what happened and what's the significance of remembering this kind of event so it doesn't repeat itself. So I think that's
That's true. And I think, of course, you need to know about the bigger picture, but it always gets into not only into your mind, but in your heart more if you know a specific like personal touch, and not only I don't know, the numbers or something like this?
No, of course, but it differs from place to place, okay? So it differs how a country was affected. Wardan mentioned the war never came on the soil of Georgia or Armenia, but there were hundreds of thousands lost from both of our countries in the war. But in different places, they have different connotation and the background. So I think just the magnitude of the war and the life stories, or in general or individual, young people should know that this, you know, this is not something that distant. First of all, it was just 70 plus years before, and the other thing that this was something that is actually affecting them still. So that's kind of lost in the new generations. I'm talking about here. Every country has its own context and way of celebration, and in some places it's remembered much bigger than in the others. So that's why,
Yeah.
pointing this out.
Hey. Can I say something, Jonathan?
Please.
Yep. We when we were discussing about this event, we mentioned about it a lot, that YMCA Europe Roots for Reconciliation project and some of the people who have been participants of this project know that we have a very identical and a very well developed methodology called the Do No Harm approach, which is a methodology building on connectors and you know, making us aware of the dividers, but rather building on connectors. And I think what activities we can do, you know, related to the remembrance, very specifically, you know, I hope that in 1 year we will bring together young people in one way or another, but they will really be working on finding connectors out of this remembrance, something that connects everybody. I think these symbols, these places of commemoration, they definitely carry connectors for each young person in Europe and in the world. And I really hope that we as a team, we as an organization will be able to identify that connectors, and we will build our narrative from them on that connectors, rather than the other kind of representatives of the society who are just in search of dividers, you know, like as Rezi mentioned, you know, whether it's on the 8th or on the 9th. As a matter of fact, it was the same hour, you know. It was the same hour when the paper was signed, and then it was 8 in one part of the world and 9 in the other part of the world. But people are just trying to find a, you know, divider and make a discourse around it. I think we, the YMCA, will find the connectors, and then everybody will feel part of the story, part of the initiative. And I fully agree with you, Jessica, that numbers don't tell the tragedy. It's the story of people that tells the tragedy, I think. And that story of every single person is a connector. Because when it goes down to the individual level, then each of us feels it under our skin. You know, we feel like it was us. It was not somebody, you know, it was us. So thank you.
Very good, and very well put also. I think these are all things we need to take with us as we organize and we plan things for next year, which is, by the way, also the way I want to end this session. 1 hour has passed. Because next year, hopefully in May, but this far we are not yet sure about the date. This depends a bit on our national agency. We will indeed organize this event in the Netherlands, and yeah, most of all of your countries will be involved in one way or another. And not yet, but in a not so distant future, we will start to establish a team so we can, of young people, of young leaders that wants to take upon them the task to give shape to this project with, so for them being young leaders, they can work together internationally, crossing their own boundaries, their own cultural borders, by creating something together and creating a worthwhile event for participants from their own countries. And that's the message with which I wish to end this meeting. I wish you a very good Sunday. I wish you a very good week ahead. I wish you good health in times of Corona. And for the rest, I wish you all the best.